So back for another episode of That's Mental, and we're with Mal Craghill, who's a former Tornado GR1 and GR4 nav, and also F-15E Craghill WSO. I think you had an exchange there, which was great. But Mal, can you tell us where your anxiety and panic attacks started from?
Yeah, it's bizarre because I still don't know what caused the panic attacks and anxiety to start, but it happened in December 2012. And I woke up in the middle of the night one night, and I was aware that something had happened. I was just feeling weird, didn't feel right, tension, like muscular tension in my chest. I thought, I don't know what's happened there. Got up to go to the toilet, and everything, like the world was moving in slow motion. I was having hot flushes. I just did not feel at all right. So I just sat back down on the bed and woke my wife up and said, right, this is what's happening. So she rang NHS 111. They immediately, because of the chest pains, they immediately sent an ambulance. So before I knew it, I was in A&E in Boston Hospital, being looked at for possible heart attack, and they didn't find anything. They can search. They do a blood test straight away to search for a protein that's released when you have a heart attack. That was all clear. They did a chest X-ray, all clear. They did a bunch of other tests, and at the end of it, everything was absolutely fine. I was in perfect health, which, I mean, it would have been a surprise to me if I wasn't, because I was still having annual aircrew medicals. I'm still jumping through those hoops every year, and I'm keeping fit and all that. And the nurse who discharged me at the end, he was a heart nurse, and he said to me, and this is the first time of many that I've heard this exact expression, probably just stress. Right, okay. So try and get a bit of downtime if you can. It was coming up to Christmas, so actually, weirdly, the day it happened, I was actually in the middle of a week of duty as station duty exec at RAF Cranwell, at the RAF College. Yeah, so I had to ring the orderly officer and say, look, nothing to worry about, but your station duty exec is in A&E at the moment, just being checked out for something. Probably be all right. I'll let you know as soon as I'm back on base. Great. And so I just, Christmas was coming up, and I got to chill out a bit over Christmas, and things calmed down a bit. But in the new year, a couple of months into the new year, it just started happening again. I would get these panic attacks out of the blue. Often when I was getting in the car, actually. And for folks who've not experienced a panic attack before, it's awful. In the moment, you feel like you're going to die. You start hyperventilating. You're hot. You can't catch your breath. There's your heart's pounding. You've got muscular pain in your chest. It's like you're completely cramping up, and you can't see any way out of it. And you just have to let it pass. But it's awful when it's happening. And to put it into some sort of context, I was driving. About a year and a half later, when this was still happening to me, I was driving my daughter from Lincolnshire back up to Newcastle, back up to uni. And between leaving my house in Lincoln, near Sleaford, and getting on the A1 at Newark, I had probably a dozen, maybe 14 panic attacks whilst driving. And I couldn't do anything about it. I'm driving the car. And stopping to deal with it doesn't help, because there's nothing really to deal with. And it was just absolutely awful. And so these things kept coming and going, and I finished the job at Cranwell. So I was CEO of the Air Warfare School at the time, and deputy head of Ops Division in the Air Warfare Centre, which was headquartered up at Waddington. So I was doing a lot of travel between the two places. And at the end of that tour, I got selected for a Chief of the Air Staff Fellowship. So I went off to the University of Exeter for a year to do a Master's in Strategy. Wow. And as soon as I got down there, it just doubled down. It got even worse. That was the point. I started in Exeter the same week my daughter started. She's our eldest. She started uni up in Newcastle, and Ellen and our son were still in Lincolnshire. So we'd managed to split the family right across the UK from northeast to southwest, or across England from northeast to southwest. And that brought its own challenges as well. But I kept having the panic attacks down in Exeter, and this kind of ongoing general feeling of anxiety. Went to see the medics at the uni. They did more blood tests. Again, everything's coming back clear. And I keep hearing this expression, it's probably just stress. And that use of the word just really minimises the experience because it was bloody awful. And it got to the point where I was writing my dissertation. So I'm basically 18, 19 months into this experience of having these panic attacks and anxiety. And I happened to be, as you do when you write your dissertation, doing some work avoidance, and came across an article that completely randomly, I wasn't looking for it, that talked about the symptoms of anxiety and panic attacks. And I'm reading through it, and it's like a tick list. I'm going, yep, got that. Yep, that happens to me. Yep. Okay. I went back to see the RAF doc and said, right, I think what's been happening to me is panic attacks and anxiety. And his exact words, oh, you might well be right. Okay, right. Well, you're welcome for me doing your diagnosis for you. Now what?
Yeah.
So he said, well, I'll put you on, I'll prescribe you propranolol, which is a beta blocker more commonly used for lowering blood pressure, but in low doses, it's supposed to be quite good for anxiety. So he puts me on propranolol and refers me for counselling with the DCMH, which is the military's Department for Community Mental Health.
Right.
So whilst I'm writing my dissertation, I go on propranolol and I get a couple of sessions of counselling at Cranwell, which were distinctly average, actually. I didn't know that at the time because I'd never had counselling before. So I got this counselling, did a couple of sessions and thought, yeah, all right, it does seem to be easing the burden a little bit. And I suspect what was actually happening was it's just that there'd been a recognition, a diagnosis of what might be going on, and that in itself was easing the symptoms for me because now I kind of had something to work with. The propranolol did absolutely nothing for me. I know some people it works great for. For me, it was doing absolutely nothing. So that didn't help me at all. And then I went off to my job post my master's, which was in the Ministry of Defence. So, no let up in pace. Mm-hmm. And a few months in, all the symptoms came back again. So I got referred for counselling again. And I got some really, really good counselling this time with a lady at again, DCMH, but at Woolwich Barracks this time. And over the period of about 6 months, so I was going about every 3 weeks, I think, did some really good work with her and came to understand how I could control my anxiety symptoms. But now I look back on it, the big thing that was missing was I still didn't know where this was coming from. Mm-hmm. And to this day, I still don't. I did my last op tour in 2009, late 2009, early 2010. So I was out in Qatar and spent a bit of time in Afghanistan. That was a 6-monther, and that was really ferocious. Actually, there could be some seeds of what happened there. Not particularly from threat exposure. So I was in Afghanistan a couple of times, and everywhere I went, it seemed like the Taliban knew where I was, and there was a rocket attack. But it felt a bit like the Truman Show, actually. Mm-hmm. But I was working 6.5 day weeks out there because I was covering for the American colonel who was absent. They'd gapped the post accidentally. Anyway, just a hell of a lot going on there. So it might have some background there. It might stem back to the Gulf War. It could stem back to something in childhood. You've got no idea. And what I'm learning more recently is that is how the different parts of the brain work. And so the amygdala controls your fight or flight response. And in normal circumstances, if there's a threat that the body recognises and can deal with, the amygdala deals with it, and the rest of the brain kind of notes it and moves on. So your prefrontal cortex, which deals with rational thought, isn't affected particularly. Your hippocampus, which deals with memory and differentiating between past and present, copes with those memories, files them away, and away they go. When there's a big threat, the amygdala just essentially shuts down everything else. So the hippocampus particularly the link is severed. So you cannot, whatever that trauma is, it's so bad that you cannot, it won't be be stored consciously in your memory because the hippocampus isn't functioning correctly at that point because the amygdala has basically severed comms. So it's fascinating learning how the brain works, but doesn't get me any nearer to being fixed. So yeah, after that set of counselling, everything seemed to sort of settle down again and was manageable. And the anxiety would come and go, but I wasn't having the panic attacks. I was getting the feelings of anxiety, which typically for me would come as chest tension. But that in itself presents its own problems because right back from when I had that first panic attack and was taken into A&E and they were assessing me for a heart attack, when I was back in A&E 4 months later or whatever it was, because I was having the same sort of symptoms, I went through all those same checks. So they're looking for heart attacks again. So something in my brain at that point says, all this is heart related then, isn't it? Despite the fact there's absolutely no evidence that it is or was. And that's just something that got wedged in there. So I've got this unhelpful thought stuck in there. And now, so then subsequently, whenever I would get anxiety and this tension would come on in my chest, the brain starts thinking, this will be it. This will be the one.
Yeah.
And at that point, the amygdala does its thing, blocks everything else out, and you get stuck in this cycle where you cannot dissociate from the thoughts. You can't switch those thoughts off. No matter how many useful articles you read on Google or videos on YouTube, you can't do a bloody thing about it because it's just how your brain works.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, could you talk to anyone when you were still in the military side? Did you have any mates you could go and talk to about this, or was it just to yourself and your family? And obviously,
yeah, I was very open about it, and I figured, well, look, if this is happening to me, I've got to assume it's happening to other people as well. But I'm not hearing people talking about it.
Yeah.
Now, everyone at work was fantastically supportive about this, so I didn't have any issues with. I know some people when they have mental health issues, if the workplace atmosphere isn't right, they just don't feel they can talk about it. But I wasn't in that situation at all, so I thought, well, it's going to help me to talk about it with people because they might have things that can help me, but also I might be able to help them. So I was very open about it. I put out a post on LinkedIn as well when it came around to the next, mental health day, mental health awareness day, and got a lot of supportive comments about it. But interestingly, again, very few people would talk to me about mental health in an open situation, like when there were other people around. They would come and collar me on the quiet, say, really interesting what you said there, and I can relate to some of that because I know somebody or I've had or whatever it might be. And we have an annual Tornado Aircrew reunion now each year down in London. And at that, certainly when I was first open about this, I would get known to people collaring me when I was, away from the crowd. Like the toilets there were downstairs and along a corridor, so you'd be, backwards and forwards after a few beers, and past people on the stairs, and they'd be like, "No, can I just have a chat about that post you put up?"
Oh wow!
And I'd love to have those chats with people, and glad that what I'd said was helpful. It's just a shame so many people don't feel that they can be open about it. But I think it's improving, and certainly if I look back at when I deployed to Book in 1990 for what would be the Gulf War, we had absolutely no preparation for the mental side of it, and the war was traumatic for everybody in differing degrees, and some people found it very difficult to cope. Now, I thought I'd done pretty well. I was out there the whole time, flew 22 missions. Came back from them all, importantly. But a lot of people did try to kill me in that time. And so, there could be some seeds of all this way back then. I don't know. The therapist I saw when I was in MOD was very quick to rule that out. It's not PTSD or anything like that. Yeah, all right, fine. I mean, I'm not looking for a PTSD diagnosis if I haven't got it. But and then, as I said, everything had calmed down for quite some time until this last year. And over the last, 18 months now, I've had quite a few significant losses. So 18 months ago, probably, a good mate of mine from 16 Squadron, when we were at Tabuk in the Gulf War, died, and I was at his funeral. Then my stepmother died. That was relatively expected. She'd been ill for a long time. Middle of December last year, my sister was taken ill and died very unexpectedly, very quickly, and in it was illness, but still the rate it progressed took everybody by surprise, and so that was pretty horrific. And then Christmas last year, my father-in-law was taken ill, and he died in February. And all of this, but I'm guessing my sister particularly triggered something this year, and the early part of this year, I was just having these anxiety attacks and the irrational thoughts and being stuck in doom loops of thinking. So I went to see the GP again, and they referred me for counselling, and that was going to be quite a weight on the NHS. But then I discovered something, and for any veterans watching this, Up Courage. It's a tie-up between the NHS and the MOD for mental health support for serving personnel, veterans, and their families.
Oh, brilliant.
And I found out about this, and I got in touch with, as a veteran, you can self-refer, so I got straight in touch with them. They put me on to, they effectively contracted me out to Walking with the Wounded, who were fantastic. They contracted with a private provider to do anxiety counselling for me. And I did 12 sessions with him, focusing again on anxiety. And this will be the part of the story where we come to realise that I'm slowly at this point starting to realise I think anxiety is a symptom and not the disease, if you like, not the central issue. Mm-hmm. Because I was getting very good counselling, but it wasn't making a dent. Mm-hmm. And at the end of these 12 sessions, the chap said to me, I think, in his discharge notes, he said, I think you've got some grief depression, so you'd benefit from some grief counselling. Mm-hmm. So that makes perfect sense to me, actually. Yep. So I got in touch with Cruise, the bereavement charity, and I did a few sessions of bereavement counselling with them. And it all made perfect sense, but still didn't make a dent. Still didn't make a scrap of difference. And all this time, I'm an analytical person, rational thinker. I would, when my brain allows it, anyway. So I've got reams of notes on what anxiety and grief can do to the body. And actually, let me read a couple of these, because for anyone who hasn't experienced this, here's a list of symptoms that can be caused just by grief. Loss of appetite, vulnerability to physical illness, exhaustion, difficulty sleeping, feeling mentally drained, chest pains, breathlessness, headaches, infections, dry mouth, hair loss, weak muscles, tension, stomach problems, skin rashes, loss of direction and hope. Wow. And that's just grief. And it can also lead to substance abuse and risky behaviours and all sorts of things. But just as an illustration for anyone who hasn't suffered with mental ill health, just how it can affect you. And it all stems, all those physical symptoms are not the symptom of anything wrong with your body. Mm-hmm. It's all in your mind. It's all this business with the like a broken link between the amygdala and the hippocampus, and they actually, your hippocampus can shrink with trauma. And so great, now it's even less capable of dealing with storing your memories and differentiating between past and present. And so, I'm lucky in the sense that if this is trauma-based, I've never had the flashbacks that are classic with PTSD. I've never felt suicidal or like harming myself in any way. But it all makes perfect sense if you think about what you're exposed to as military aircrew. I've lost a lot of friends, and a lot in aircraft crashes, and there's no way of an aircraft crash not being traumatic and messy. Yeah. Suicides, a couple of friends I've lost to suicide, a handful to cancer. Previously fit and healthy military blokes. Yeah. You start to see that this must be a pretty widespread problem. I mean, I know different
Yeah.
people deal with it differently, and I'm not saying everybody has to have mental ill health because they've been exposed to trauma or whatever it might be. But you think of the routine for military aircrew on operations, going out day after day, flying ops, exposed to threat to varying degrees. You are dealing with maybe troops in firefights on the ground. You're dropping weapons. People are firing at you. The helicopter world. What the
Yeah.
Merc crews were doing and putting troops in and bringing them out and all of that. You see some horrific things.
Absolutely. And
And so it,
do you ever get any depressive episodes, or is it mainly the anxiety and the panic attacks for yourself?
yeah, it's interesting because like I said, my counsellor earlier this year said I think there's some grief depression in there.
Yeah, yeah.
And there are aspects of it. So then Mal goes away and does change all the world's research into depression and symptoms, and there are definitely aspects that have hit me. I know I've seen depression firsthand around me in my family, and it's not like that. I've never not been able to get out of bed in the morning.
Right. Okay.
I felt a bit crap getting out of bed in the morning, but I've never felt I can't take the next step and do something and get out. And actually, that's an interesting point in itself. Is that one of the things with the amygdala in your brain is that when it prepares the body for fight or flight, it perceives a threat. It prepares you for that fight or flight by releasing particularly adrenaline, but also cortisol. The adrenaline is designed to prime you for movement. So
Right.
it's expecting you to use that adrenaline running away from the threat or running after the prey that you're chasing or whatever it is. And we're in quite a sedentary world nowadays. So if you're in a situation where you have a panic attack or whatever, your amygdala senses a threat and it will pump adrenaline into the body to prime you. If you then don't use that adrenaline, it's then coursing around your system, causing a lot of these physical symptoms. So that it's why, and I only made this connection quite recently. This is why people say with mental ill health, one of the best things you can do to help yourself relieve it is move your body. Now, I know that with a lot of people, and particularly with depression, that is so hard to do. It's easy advice to give, but hard to do. But I think helpful to understand that connection. That why do you need to move your body is to use up some of that adrenaline and get it out of your system, because otherwise it's got nowhere to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that point, because I've suffered since I was 13, I think our viewers know now, but even like talking about this, like I only recently thought of the idea because I thought it would affect the channel and what my business is and stuff like that, because I thought, oh, people are going to think you're weak. And I was like, and then you read about things and like people, like other people like in the aircrew world, and you're like, oh, well, if he's suffering, like I can talk about it. Because like sometimes I got messages from people, they would say, had the worst week in the world, couldn't get out of bed, but your videos made it like a bit better. And I was like, right, so it's not just people, nerds watching aircrew actually helps. But as you were saying about getting out of bed, sometimes it is difficult for me. But then it's like someone saying to you, right, there's Ben Nevis, go and climb it now. And you're like, and it's like, it is really hard. But then you do get yourself up. But I'm very lucky because I work from home. But if I was having, let's say, a bad day or two, and I just worked at Tesco's, and I had to go in because that's how I made my money, that would be really difficult. So I'm very lucky in that sense. But I'll just share one story with you about the panic attack. So I was filming. I did sometimes if I can get two people in at once on a weekend, so it makes more sense logically and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Did the first interview, that went fine. Woke up at 5 the next morning for the next interview. I'm not going to say the guest. And I had the biggest panic attack ever. I couldn't breathe, like you were saying. And I honestly, I couldn't breathe. It was awful. And then I had to cancel the whole interview and travel all the way back up north, which was about 5 hours, because I couldn't be in that environment. Yeah. And so I understand like the panic attacks. And how do you deal with them then? Like is there anything you say you just kind of have to go with it, but is there any advice you can give our viewers?
I think the best advice I could give is don't try and escape it, because you're not going to escape it. you feel like you want to leave the room.
Yeah.
It's not going to help. Leaving the room is only going to, if you literally run from the problem, you're only going to make the hyperventilation worse.
Yeah.
Part of the problem is not, if you don't know it's panic attacks you're having, like if it's the first time you've ever had one, like when I woke up in the middle of the night, what are you going to do? You're literally panicking about your panic attack now.
Yeah.
But once you know it's a panic attack, then there are things you can do, like breathing into a paper bag can be helpful because the carbon dioxide reuptake helps to slow your breathing. But it's also worth people knowing that if you're with someone when they experience a panic attack, the absolute best thing you can do is just sit with them and tell them it'll pass. Don't try and minimize it. Don't say it's just a panic attack because, like I said, to that person, it's going to feel like they may well die in the next few moments.
Yeah.
Just be reassuring. Just be a friend for them. Hold their hand or just sit with them or whatever it might be, and it will pass. And then you can do the rationalising and talking about it. And one thing that I do want to mention actually is when I'd finished the anxiety counselling earlier this year, I thought naively right, that's going to be it. I'll be sorted now. So I thought all the way through this, I've been dealing with this kind of by myself. I mean, family and friends have been brilliant and supportive and everything. But what I mean is that I've never been anywhere where, to my knowledge, there's been group therapy available. So I came out of this and thought, I'm going to start a men's mental health peer support group. And I went to my local community centre and said, would you be interested in somebody setting up a men's mental health support group here? And the community centre manager's exact response was, yes, yes, yes. All right, I'll call that a willing audience then. And so I have. And the community centre have been absolutely brilliant in setting it up. And for the last couple of months, I've been running this men's mental health community peer support group at the community centre. And it's not huge at the moment. There's 5 or 6 of us that go, but it's lovely, and I do it every couple of weeks on a Tuesday evening, and it's just completely low key. I advertise it. It's been advertised. Loads of local businesses have helped me with the advertising, and I advertise it as it's non-clinical. Come along and effectively chat about your mental health with blokes in similar situations. And I spoke to all sorts of people about it before I set it up. I spoke to the practice manager at the local medical practice. I spoke to a counsellor who works in the community centre and a couple of other counsellors as well that I got in touch with randomly. And they all told me about, well, these are the prevalent issues locally. It's a farming community. There's a lot of depression in farming communities and mental ill health. And there is, particularly amongst livestock farmers, which is what it is around our way in Cumbria. And they listed all these things, and the guys that come don't fall into it at the moment, at least, don't fall into any of the brackets that I would have prepared for if I'd just listened to that advice.
Right.
There's all sorts of things so it's, and like you said with the comments you've had from some people about their mental health videos, about Fatsy's video, I've had some lovely comments from the guys who come to the group that have got in touch with me privately to say, so lovely you're doing this. I really needed it. And naively, I thought I was setting it up to help other people, and it is helping other people. But now that I know that counselling didn't fix my anxiety, it's actually very helpful for me as well.
Yeah, I think it can benefit both parties because it's not selfish because you're helping someone else and yourself at the same time, which is really great. But do you think there's still a stigma around going into the RAF now if you had mental health, whatever that would be, panic attacks, depression, etc.?
So I think things have changed markedly. In my time in the Air Force, I said that my last operational deployment came back from that in 2010. And because I had been on a non-formed unit deployment, I had gone out as an individual to augment the staff at the Air Operations Centre in Al Udeid in Qatar. I fell through the cracks again on this one. But if you went out as a formed unit, so say an RAF squadron goes out to do a stint in theatre, or an army unit goes out and they go out as a formed unit for their 6 months on deployment. At the end of that, first of all, they would get mental resilience training ahead of the deployment. And then at the end of it, they wouldn't just get on a plane at Kandahar and fly straight back to Briars Norton and be reunited with their families. They would go to Cyprus for, I think, 3 or 4 days and just decompress at Cyprus. There'd be psychiatrists there you could talk things through with, but you could just sort of, it sort of normalises life a bit before you then go straight back to your families and straight into childcare and maybe relationship issues and whatever else there might be. So the approach to it is very, very different now. And as I said, the Department of Community Mental Health is good. When you get a good counsellor through them, that can be brilliant. So it's so very different now. And I mean, in many ways, probably better than... My information is going to be 6 years out of date now since I left 6.5 years. But probably at that time, I would say it was probably better than your average... what do they call it in private companies where you get mental health care? The provision that they provide, it's probably better than that.
It's kind of like an afterthought type thing.
Yeah. And I know it's talked about a lot, and there've been some high profile suicides and near suicides in the RAF recently, and that's focused people's attentions. And talking to, so I go cycling each year with a few mates, some of whom are veterans too, and a couple of them are still serving. And I asked about how things are at the moment, and they said it's, you can't get on a mental health first aid course, not because there aren't any, but because they're all oversubscribed.
Right.
As an example. Well, that's great. You can do with more provision, maybe train more trainers, but that's fantastic that you're in that situation rather than you can't get on a course because the military won't provide it. So I think, I think things are very different. I certainly hope so. But I think the biggest thing is if there is stigma, if you're feeling like you've got mental health problems and you don't know if you can speak out or not, you don't know if your chain of command are going to be supportive or not. Two things. First of all, they've got to be. It's mandate. It would be a failure of duty of care if they weren't supportive. But secondly, if they're not supportive, then you're probably not in the right job anyway. You're probably not in the right environment. Now that's easy for me to say because I'm not in that situation at the moment. But I'm retired now. But if you're watching this and you've got mental health issues and you don't know what they are, I would first of all say go and see your GP because they can at least get you maybe onto medication and point you in the direction of counselling. A lot of NHS areas you can self-refer for counselling, so you can look that up online and just get yourself in the system. And it might take a while to get there. But I think from my personal experience now, the biggest thing I would say is when you get there, don't just accept a diagnosis of, well, it's anxiety or it's depression or it's whatever. Ask the next question, which is because of what?
Yeah.
Why have I got anxiety? Why have I got depression? And if you can't get that answer with your GP in your 10, 15 minute window of seeing them, then at least when you get to counselling, say to, go through it with your counsellor. I've been diagnosed with anxiety. I've been put on propranolol. This is or isn't helping. The things that I particularly want to fix are, like, I want to get to a point where panic attacks aren't ruining my life, for example, but I want to know where it stems from, and because only in getting to the root of it, I think, are you ever going to be able to get out the other side of it and live a more normal life. Nobody is free of mental health issues. It would be, I think you'd have to be a psychopathic narcissist to not suffer mental health issues. So, there's maybe a few, Boris Johnson, Donald Trump. But I think the vast majority of people suffer with it at some point in time. Just look up the statistics, for your nation, wherever you're watching from, look up the mental health statistics. And if there are statistics kept, it'll show you the very high number of people who on average experience mental ill health in any given year, and you will see that you are not alone. You look around, if there's a room with 10 people in it, 4 or 5 of them have got mental health issues.
Absolutely. So if you can just remind us, I think you mentioned the veteran counselling. Can you remind us of that, Mal? And I'll put that in the
Yeah,
linking below.
it's called Up Courage, and if you're serving personnel or if you're a veteran, you can self-refer. If you've got a family member as a serving member or veteran that needs help, then their GP can refer them through Up Courage. And just because it's using the military charities to support, it's likely to get you into counselling sooner. I mean, there's no guarantees of that, but and you're more likely to get a counsellor who has experience dealing with the armed forces community. So that's for I say veterans and serving personnel and their families. For everybody else in the UK, certainly. Look up through your local NHS, Google NHS mental health services, and it will take you through which area you're in and how you can find those.
Brilliant stuff. Well, Mal, thank you very much for coming on the show and sharing a bit about your story. I'm sure you're going to help a few people there. So cheers.
I hope so. Yeah.
Cheers.